speech I was going to give and was advertised in the program has been blown up because I watched Edward Snowden give that speech last night. Did you guys see this?
Yeah, it was awesome.
The most important thing he said, hopefully becomes the topic of what we're going to talk about today. He said towards the end of the conversation, we have more power than you imagine. Do you guys remember him saying that? And putting ideas into his head and words in his mouth, I think what he's talking about is the unprecedented potential for all of us to know things that we couldn't know before, to connect with people like we could never connect before, and to do something with the liberty movement that I could not have imagined when I was your age. When I was 13 years old, I discovered freedom from reading the liner album notes on a rock album by a band called Rush. And I had no idea who Rush was, but I thought it was cool. I had no idea who Ayn Rand was, but I thought the name was kind of cool. And I stumbled across all of these ideas that you guys would have just Googled, right? Maybe you saw something on YouTube, or maybe you heard somebody give a talk. You go on Google, within seconds you have created for yourself a curriculum, a set of ideas, a set of readings, a path that you can develop for yourself that we just couldn't do when I was a kid. I call it the long tail of the internet, because at the fat end of the internet is mass marketing, and that's where Taylor Swift sells millions of albums, right? But at the very end of the internet, that's where kids are reading human action. But there's 1 billion people on Facebook. Imagine how many of those billion people might be interested in the ideas that you have to talk about. I think this is the potential moment that we need to get ready for. I think it's going to happen quicker than we know. And Edward Snowden's comments were a great example of that. He talked about transparency. He talked about the values of respecting the individual. He talked about everything that we talk about every day. But I want to talk a little bit about what that model might look like applied more broadly. And I happen to be a Deadhead. Does anyone remember the Grateful Dead? I think Jerry Garcia might have died before many of you were born. But, big fan of the Grateful Dead, but I'm a bigger fan of this guy, John Perry Barlow. John Perry Barlow is an interesting guy. He's a cyber-libertarian. He was the co-founder of an online anti-censorship organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He was a campaign organizer for Dick Cheney in the 70s. Go figure that one out. He's embarrassed about that now. He was one of the first people to appreciate the potential of the internet to fundamentally change the relationship between top-down institutions and the rest of us. And this is a quote that he made just a couple years ago, talking about what he calls the right to know. And it's important enough that I put it up there. I don't want to butcher it, and I'm going to read it to you. He says, for the first time, we have it within range to make it possible for anybody, anywhere, to know everything that he is intellectually capable of assimilating on any topic. That is to say, he can know as much, whether it is in the uplands of Maui or Midtown Manhattan, about some nuance of molecular biology as presently known by anyone. There is, I think, the possibility that we can convey to future generations the right to know. The right to know as much as they want to know, and that includes everything that's presently known and generally applicable by anybody. And it also includes everything that is known or can be known about what one's government is doing. Think about the potential of what he's saying. This is what Edward Snowden was saying last night. You have an ability to know what these guys are up to. Public choice economists always predicted that free societies would inevitably collapse because all of the special interests would take the levers of power because they wanted something. And it cost money to get that information, so they'd hire lobbyists that would hoard that information. And if you think about the way that government works, they're really hoarding information. They don't want you to know what they're up to. And we were all what economists call rationally ignorant. We didn't know that they were screwing us until long after we had been screwed. And at that point, there was nothing you could do about it. And public choice is a very sad and dismal science because they tell you basically there's absolutely nothing you can do. This freedom can't possibly survive the inevitable tendencies of government to grow and grow and grow until countries collapse. And we've seen this throughout history. We're seeing it play out in countries like Greece as we speak today. But what if we knew? What if the marginal cost of finding out what they were up to, sometimes before they knew what they were up to, was so low that people with jobs and families and so many more important things to do than monitor their government could actually know in real time what was happening? That's where we are today. That's the reason why there are so many of you at this conference. Last year there was a lot fewer of you. The year before, I think there was half as many as that. I think the first Students for Liberty was, what, 7 years ago? Was anyone here 7 years ago?
5 years ago.
5? How many were here then?
680?
Yeah. Which is just amazing to me as well. So the question is, what are we going to do with that? What are you guys going to do with that? And I think the potential can be a little bit overwhelming. I got my start reading Ayn Rand, and I read Atlas Shrugged, and the entire novel is about John Gall trying to convince Dagny Taggart to drop the mic and walk off stage, right? But the burden on you is fundamentally different. The weight of the world, like Atlas, is on your shoulders. But because of the internet, because of social media, because of your potential to take responsibility, the way that Edward Stone did, in his mind. What are you going to do with that? Well, I think we should get involved. But of course, the counter to that, you guys have so much power and so much choice and so much access to information. You're radically free in a way that no generation has been before you. You don't seem overwhelmed by the infinite choices you have online when you decide what to read or what to buy. One of the old arguments, by the way, against free markets was that people couldn't possibly handle all that choice. It would be overwhelming and it would just upset you. But you guys seem to manage, you look fine. You seem to be managing okay. But you know who's not fine? Taxi cab monopoly in New York City. They're not fine at all right now. They hate Uber. They hate the fact that Uber has democratized capital to the point where anybody that has an empty car seat can brutally, efficiently allocate those resources to a neighbor or someone they don't know. That's power. And the cab monopoly, which when I was in school I was taught you couldn't beat the cab monopoly. It couldn't happen because the laws of public choice said that it couldn't happen. Well, it happened. Not a single shot was fired as far as I can tell. The same thing with Amazon, the same thing with Facebook and Twitter's ability to overwhelm totalitarian regimes. You saw it happen in Ukraine, you saw it happen throughout the Middle East. I've seen it with my organization when activists that otherwise couldn't have organized now manage communities on their own at zero marginal cost of thousands and thousands of people. I know a mom in Oklahoma who through Instagram and a Facebook page went from being really angry about the Common Core curriculum she was being forced to teach her kids to forcing a Democratic governor to sign the bill that she had helped write. And she did that with her time. She didn't raise a lot of money. She didn't do any of that stuff. Of course, the other side is freaking out about this as well when it comes to issues that really matter. Those congressmen, are you guys here for Massey and Amash?
Yeah.
Those guys wouldn't exist without the internet because their local parties wouldn't have allowed them to exist. They would cut off their funding. Justin Amash faced a primary challenge from a Chamber of Commerce Republican this last cycle, and he was able to raise money outside the system. That's where Rand Paul came from. That's where every single liberty candidate that you can name has come from. They were able to self-organize. They're trying to figure out a way to stop you guys from expressing your opinions, from participating in a process that is supposedly all about you. Lindsey Graham, the day of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, was one of the most shameless exploitations of a crisis that I've ever seen. He immediately tweeted, "Feel really bad for those guys, but this really proves my point that we need to grow the surveillance state." Never let a crisis go to waste, right? Well, why would he do that? Because Justin Amash, and Thomas Massey, and Rand Paul, and Mike Lee, and Ted Cruz, and dozens of other congressmen, Republicans and Democrats, are actually going to fix the problem of mass collection of your phone data. It's going to happen. And it's going to happen because the trend is towards more liberty. The trend is towards more people knowing in real time what the government is doing to them. Even Thomas Clapper gets busted now when he lies to a congressional committee. They're freaking out. They're very nervous about it. But that's why we need to double down. That's why the answer to any question you're going to ask me, I'm just going to give you the same answer. More liberty, more involvement, more decentralization, more local control, more wisdom that comes from crowds, not experts. Because we're at that moment in history where Walter Cronkite doesn't get to tell you what to think anymore. You guys don't remember this, but there used to be a single half-hour allocation of information every weekday night provided to you by Walter Cronkite, and he ended that half hour saying, "That's the way it is." There was no Twitter reaction to that. There was no public debate. There was no way to fact-check Walter Cronkite, because when you went to the other two TV networks, they told you the exact same thing. Now bloggers in basements and Twitter queens get the news long before the networks do. This is an opportunity for all of you. So, what does this mean for American politics? How many of you guys have participated in a campaign before? How many of you guys would never dream of touching politics? I bet you guys change your mind. Because I bet you are going to see a better product put on the shelf. Maybe not by the GOP establishment, maybe not by the Democratic establishment, but you're seeing a move away from bipartisanship, which I define as splitting the difference between somebody else's bad idea, and what I call transpartisanship, which is about something bigger than politics. And there is a growing transpartisan coalition that Thomas Massey referenced earlier on things like criminal justice reform, where you get someone like Mike Lee, the conservative Mormon from Utah, and Patrick Leahy, a radical progressive from Vermont, and a deadhead, by the way, so that makes him cool. They're working on the same legislation. And it's happening again and again and